Immigration, a very polarizing topic in the United States, but the polarization is not the focus of this video. The video will focus on the public policy implementations of an evolving immigration system. While it may exclude at other times and open its arms at other times, the system has existed since the creation of naturalization within the colonies. Through the 5 lenses, the very units that our government class has focused on for the past several months, I will break immigration down. So without further ado, let us get right into our first unit, with the Constitution. While the Constitution itself doesn't dedicate a lot of time to the idea of immigration, and that's due because the qualifications of what was considered an immigrant were a lot different now than they are in the 1700s. Mentioning the differences and asking, hey, what are those differences? Leads me to the precedent document of the Constitution, that being the Articles of Confederation. While the Articles failed in many ways, one thing it did make clear was the American policy regarding the qualifications of an immigrant and the recognition of the process called naturalization, given the power to that decision to the states, which I see as another fatal flaw. Another of the compromises needed to pass some type of loose binding between these states into what at the time was called a union. That is not, however, the policy of choice for this unit. If one were to look at the wording of the Constitution, more specifically analyzing Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4, you would see a clear change from states, as found in the Articles of Confederation, to the federal government in the Constitution. And that, folks, is the focus of the Immigration Unit 1. The change in the wording between these two founding documents. From the wording change, a lot is established. A clear line in the sand by Federalists regarding the bare minimum of their authority. 2. A large compromise from the opposition, found mainly from Thomas Jefferson and his supporting factions, fearing the power of the federal government. This compromise shows the mutual understanding of some need for a centralized government with the authority over matters of the state, seeing as the document that gave way to the Constitution failed in many, many ways and ended in rebellion and misunderstanding. So observing the back and forth nature of the debate over this topic and where to put the authority transitions me to the state and federal level and the wording. One can easily call it traditional democratic approach, the Founding Fathers looking out for our best interest as the basic government body of our states. But according to the UChicago, the Fathers' Constitution article regarding the matter, upon closer inspection, it shows many pluralistic characteristics. Different factions competing for their own idyllic beliefs in what they believe at the time to be the right thing for the country. If I were to look at it, I'd say a little more traditional democratic, due to the fact that they believed they were laying the groundwork for this country, and therefore they set accordingly. But that's just one thing to think about as we transition to our second unit, political beliefs and behaviors. So, focusing on political culture by ideological beliefs and behaviors would be analyzed best through a policy that really got through popular belief as well as legislative belief. While in the 1920s they were a very prosperous time for the United States of America, we also saw a large influx of immigrants from South Asia, General Asia area, East and Southern Europe. Through this influx, a lot of resentment for minority groups started, especially from those areas, and several events like the Red Scare of 1919, the uncertainty of World War I, and the massive general undertaking of jobs by these immigrants as they're coming into the countries didn't really help it. And xenophobia really got its rise here. Alright, so as I was saying, xenophobia really saw its rise here, and by the mid-1920s, anti-foreigner groups such as the KKK saw massive membership spikes, with the KKK rising to over 2 million members by 1925, according to the American Experience of the PBS website. These weren't the overzealous anti-anything groups that we think they are synonymous for today, but average American citizens who joined because they feared that their way of life was being confronted and endangered by the presence of other groups in the country. So this rise in fear and eventual hatred and increase in immigration over time really set the stage for the Immigration Act of 1924, the policy that I chose for Unit 2, and also called the National Origins Act. Really focused on stemming the communist flood from Eastern and Southern Europe, as well as halting all massive influence of Asian perspective in the country at that time, and effectively placing a very small quota of allowance by the current recorded number of people in that country by ethnicity through census data at the time, except in the case of the Asian exclusion zone, which was barred completely from entry if you were from that area or at that area at the time of moving here. According to the Office of Historians website, the 1924 Exclusion Act was the first recorded widely restricted immigration act in the United States, so that's pretty cool. So, displaying wholeheartedly the fear in every American's heart regarding the loss of wealth and the spread of evil communism, as well as playing off the uncertainty of outcome in World War I. Really, even though there wasn't any uncertainty and defeat once the Americans came storming in there at the end and everything kind of went clear. But anyway, the act reflects the popular opinion of the states at that time, and I think that was key to this unit of how the public opinion influences policy in such a big way, rather than just them doing whatever they want to do in the legislature. So a scared mob is obviously, in some cases, an angry mob, and an angry mob is something Congress has not had a history of dealing well with, therefore they will do anything to stop that. And so, therefore, this act, and its general application of Dikembe Mutombo-style immigration access into the country, fits the need to calm the masses at the time, at the risk of opportunities for a greater and more populous nation with the immigrant population coming in. But, nah. The way I see it, the act was obviously a toss-up. Either way, either the risk the dissolution of a nation that would likely result to violence against the groups that they perceive their way of life as threatening, or, hold the union together by proving the government mirrors the needs of its people and sign this bill. It really shows that at this time, immigration became a very complex issue on every level, no matter what dynamic you look at it or what scope you put it under. And that brings me to Unit 3. Unit 3 analyzed the political parties, action groups, and mass media in connection with elections. Therefore, a policy to represent this unit effectively would ideally incorporate these factors into a period of time close to or during a high-ranking election, say a president. One such policy that does just this is the focus policy for my project right here, is the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The bill itself, while clean-cut in civil rights provisions, effectively outlawing the discrimination on any terms based on the differences one holds to another, aimed at ending the unequal application of voting registration regulations and to minorities and groups like that. But it also had a very unique legislative process for the time, and up until that point and well beyond, the bill was by far the most debated and hard-fought civil rights bill to enter the floor in the Senate and the House. The political parties at the time of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 were a bit different than we think of them now, and that's just to say the least. In fact, it was almost like a role reversal. More Republicans supported the bill signing into law than Democrats. I know that seems a bit odd, how we see Democrats as the more liberal ones and the more open to an fully integrated culture where these racial barriers and every other difference barrier is broken down in the thought of the past. But in fact, the Democrats of 1964, for the majority, voted against these types of bills of racial integration because they saw that as expensive and unnecessary, while the Republicans, sticking to their roots in some aspects, voted wholeheartedly for the bills to pass as long as they didn't interfere with the rights of the states or call the states unduly into action that they didn't need to do or cost them too much. The key thing to look at here is that the tools to motivate the bill didn't really lie directly in the legislators, or that it ended up there. It started with the people, the voters. And so, if you think about it, the people elect the representatives, and if the people speak, the risk of election is there, therefore the representative will act. In the address to the American people regarding this bill, JFK used very specific language and made it quite clear that the mass media will be his message to Congress on passing the bill, as opposed to dealing with the rather stubborn Democratic Party at the time, and who he pretty much had to fight his own party to get a bill passed. So I guess that shows how the executive really doesn't have a party when he comes in the office, because he must rule for either side. So let's look at the video and check the wording that JFK uses and really analyze the loaded language and look for key terms.